Welcome to the Leverage Your Influence podcast, where we talk to amazing people about how they are leveraging their influence and impact through podcasting. Today, we're honored to have David Jackson. He is a true legend and OG in the podcasting space. He's been doing it before Apple and iPhones, and he launched his first show in 2005, and he's been a guiding voice to the entire podcasting industry. He is also the founder of the School of Podcasting, and he is a Podcast Hall of Fame inductee. We welcome today to the podcast, Mr. Dave Jackson.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yes, sir. We're honored to have you, and we're excited about all the gems that you're going to drop today to podcasters who are either seasoned or just starting out, because we believe that you're going to help us inform us on our next Podmoves. And so we're excited about this.
Yeah, well, I will do my best.
So listen, as a podcasting OG who's been doing this before the iPhone, before Apple, what drew you initially to podcasting, and what has kept you hooked all these years?
Yeah, the big thing was there were so many things that kept coming, and I go, oh, that looks cool. I should do that. And then I would. So again, we got to go way back in, but like MySpace, I caught the trail end of MySpace, and there were a bunch of other things that had kind of come and gone. And I had been writing a blog, and back then I was teaching a lot of Microsoft Office. I worked in the corporate world, and so I was up on Microsoft front page, and I'm building websites and stuff for people. And a friend of mine, I'd written a blog for musicians, and this guy said, "Hey, I just came back from this marketing event," and he goes, "I've seen the next big thing." And I go, "What is it?" And he goes, "It's podcasting." So I go to Google, I type in podcasting. I go, "Wait, how do you spell that?" Because the results were like 1.5 pages. And he goes, POD casting, I go, dude, I think we broke the internet. There's just nothing here about this. And so that kind of got me into it. And then I kind of pieces parted one together. And there was this, we're talking archaic software to use as like what would now be an iTunes or Apple podcast. But I uploaded a file and I saw it come down, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is going to be global. This is not like a radio station. And so I started one. I just took what I was doing as a blog and put it out as a podcast. And it probably took about 3 weeks, but I got a voicemail from Nuremberg, Germany. And at the time I was living in my brother's basement, and my brother stand behind me, and I hit play, and I hear this voice come out, and the guy's like, "Hello, Dave. This is Michael Van Laar from Nuremberg, Germany." And I just hit stop. My brother goes, "Did he say Germany?"
Yeah.
And I go, "He said Germany." I'm like, "Wait, hello, Dave." And I must have listened to that 15 times. And my brother's like, "Wow, that's pretty cool." And so not only did he find the show, but he liked it. And then luckily, because he was a musician, he knew how to record his voice and send it back. And that's when I just grabbed my flag, and I'm like, I hereby claim podcasting in the name of Dave. I'm like, this is my jam, because it was back then you had to be kind of a geek to do it. So you had to use some technical skills, and then you could be creative as you want. And then you can kind of do whatever you want. And so that scratched about every itch I had. And then the fact I always kind of laugh if you give a teacher a podcast, he's like, "Oh, we can all learn from each other, and I'm going to learn about different cultures, and this is going to be great." If you give a podcaster to a marketing person, they're like, "Ooh, think of all the stuff we can sell."
Yep.
And so every person has a different way of using it. But I just was like, "Oh, this is," and I need to find it, because somewhere in one of my first shows, it might be in the old Musicians Cooler show, I said, "Hey, I think podcasting is going to change the world." And over the years, it just has. And it's amazing. As I remember I did a show with Paul Colligan, Rob Walsh, who's now on Libsyn, and Gary Leland, who at the time had this really cool directory called Podcast Pickle, because Apple didn't exist and all this other stuff. And it was called This Week in Podcasting. And I remember when Maytag, the company, decided to start a podcast, and that was like big news. Just the fact that anybody was going to start a podcast. And so now, like, that happens every day. There's like a new company with a podcast. But it was fun watching it. And I remember when Serial was kind of parodied on Saturday Night Live, I was like, "Oh wait, this is a milestone. If there's enough people that aren't going, wait, what's a cereal? That I was like, I think we're mainstream.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun ride along the way.
That's phenomenal. And so, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest shifts that you've seen over the past 2 decades in the podcasting industry?
Yeah, well, first, kind of that, just going when Apple Podcasts, and Steve Jobs added it. Well, first he added it to iTunes, and that's when I saw the first and the only time really hockey stick growth. Like my numbers were pretty small because nobody knew what a podcast was, and they just shot straight up, and I was like, whoa, the power of Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when Apple added Apple Podcast as a native app, so you didn't have to install it anymore. It's like,
Right.
hey, and there were enough people just like, what's this purple thing do? Click, so there was that. And just as it's kind of weird because there are different like waves. Like originally it was all the geeks. People go like, why are all the, Hall of Fame people old technical dudes? Well, because we were the guys that only knew how to do it. But then there was like a wave of language people that were trying to learn different
Yeah.
languages. And then I'd probably say the comedians. So we had the Ricky Gervais. A lot of people forget Ricky Gervais was the first comedian that really went big. And then we had the Adam Carollas and the Mark Marons and things like that. And then this little guy named Joe Rogan eventually came along,
Yep.
but and then when Serial came, there was true crime. And I don't think that's gone away. It
Nope.
just seems like every day I turn around and there's another true crime show. So it's been fun watching that go along the way, and just the fact that I mean I've got this right here. This is a PodTrack P4 that I have one in the my closet, and I forget the brand, but it was $800, and it
Wow.
was like, I remember at the time I was like, ooh, that's a lot of money. This thing's $150,
Yep.
and it does pretty much the same thing. So they're now making products for podcasters to make it so easy. And I mean, when I first started, I was self-hosting my files. I was using Dreamweaver,
Wow.
which doesn't exist anymore. And then I finally moved to WordPress. And then when Libsyn came on board as like the first, hey, we do podcasting, I jumped on them. So along the way, it's just gotten easier and easier and easier. So it's been fun. And now a lot of people are, jumping onto YouTube, and that's where I have to put on my curmudgeon hat and go, technically,
It's not a
that's not a
podcast.
podcast.
Right.
Yeah. And the only reason I care about that is when they come out with stats. Because originally they said, yeah, we're a $2 billion advertising revenue. And then somebody said, well, wait, let's do that report again. And they included YouTube. And they're like, no, we're 7 billion. I'm like, well, which one are we? And I'm
Yeah.
like, so I've never quite understood why. Well, I understand why, because YouTube was losing some of their ad revenue to TikTok. And they're like, we got to get somebody talking about YouTube again.
Yeah.
Like this is all TikTok, and I don't know. Somebody in the corner was like, "Hey, podcasting's hot," and they're like, "That's it. Good job, Larry." And they went over and just waved their wand at all the YouTubers and said, "I dub thee a podcast." And it's funny because people, and I get it, they call me an old curmudgeon, and I'm like, "Yeah, but it's somewhere down the line we're gonna wish we hadn't let them mix that all together." And we're
Yeah.
all shows. I get that, but it's one of those things. I'm like, I think we're gonna regret calling YouTube a podcast, but we'll see.
Right. Right. So, so the barrier to entry, I mean, things have changed since
Yeah,
technology has improved. However, for someone starting out now, today, or tomorrow, what's most important? The missional focus for their podcast, the gear that they're using for their podcast, or just being
yeah,
consistent? What matters
yeah.
most?
It's not the gear, that's for sure. I mean, you can get going. This is a Samson Q2U, probably either this one or the Audio Technica ATR 2100, less than $100, and
69. Yep.
you're good to go. So it's not the gear. It's either one or one or two, and I flip back and forth on this all the time. I want to say it's your why, because when you don't get your why, you're burnout. I saw somebody this morning. I was on a Facebook group, and they're like, "I'm getting kind of crispy," and I'm like, "What's your why?" Because that's if you don't get your why, then you burn out. But the other one is your who. Like, who is this for? When somebody goes, "Oh, it's for everybody," and I'm like, "No, it's not." Even if you say, I'll hear people like, "Well, it's for men 25 to 55." And I'm like, as you know, look, as somebody who just turned 60, there's a big difference between me at 25 and me at 55. I'm
Hmm.
like, that's not the same person. And while you don't you don't have to niche down. I kind of recommend that you do. You end up with a smaller but more rabid audience that
Yes.
people are going, wow, it's like they made this for me. So there's that. And for consistency, I would rather, and it is important to be consistent because what happens is you become part of somebody's routine.
Yes.
But I would rather have a late show that was good than an on time show that was, eh, I've heard shows while hit it and they're like, well, it's Thursday. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I promised you a show every Thursday. And I'm like, and stop,
Right.
because I don't want to listen to you improv for 20 minutes and try to figure out and then go, well, that's 20 minutes. Okay, we're done. And I'm like, no. So consistency is important, but consistency in quality, I think,
Yes.
is more important.
Yes. Well said. Dave, you've been privileged to work for companies like Libsyn and Podpage now. I see your Podpage t-shirt.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite podcasting platforms?
Ooh, great question. Right now, if you and it's kind of funny because every podcast answer begins with two words, and that is it depends. Because we're all a little different. Like if I just need a basic kind of media host and I'm gonna produce a show every other week, Libsyn all day long. I always tell people if you cut me, I still kind of bleed green. But if I'm a solo entrepreneur and I want to promote my products, Captivate is my favorite. And it just barely hedges out Buzzsprout. That's almost a tie because they both have dynamic ad content. So you can
Yes.
basically you can advertise your stuff. And I always tell people it's just because I'm an old musician and Buzzsprout mixes your file down to mono, which for 99% of people is perfectly fine because it's a spoken word thing. You don't need stereo except your music. And again, if I wasn't a musician, it probably wouldn't bother me. But the other thing is, Captivate has a different business model. You can have as many shows as you want, as many episodes as you want for one price. And the only time your price goes up is if you get pretty popular 30,000 downloads a month for all of your shows. And I'm nowhere near that. And so that's where they edge out Buzzsprout just a little bit. But those are two. And there are other solid choices. Nothing wrong with Blueberry. That's another good one. Um, but
Podbean.
those are yeah, Podbean. That's another one that's been around forever. But right now Captivate's my top one. And people always say, well, you say that because you work there, but I really love Podpage. People always say, oh, you say that because you work there. I go, no, no, I work there because it's cool.
Yeah.
And it was just a case where Brennan from Podpage, he hired me back in 2020 to kind of go, is this even a good idea?
Mm.
And I was like, well, we're going to need an about page. We're going to need a contact page in our episodes. And he came back in like a week and said, like this. And I was like, whoa, that is cool. And I'm like, can you integrate it with PayPal and Patreon? And it came back in a couple days like this. And so over the years, I've just been feeding him stuff. Hey, any chance you could get it to do this? And so he just approached me and said, hey, I've got a position over here. He's like, I'd already made a course on Podpage and was giving it away for free. And he's like, you kind of already work for us. Why don't we just make this official? And it wasn't an easy choice because I'd been at Libsyn for 8 years, but it was just a case where I'm using more of my talents over here than I was at Libsyn. Still love Libsyn and Rob and Elsie and the whole team over
Yeah.
there, but this was just a better fit.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Libsyn is the OG of the
Yeah.
podcast hosting space. But
Yeah, the
Podpage
original.
helps podcasts to have robust, beautiful, user-friendly websites for a fraction of a cost.
Yeah, I always say we make pretty websites for people that don't want to learn how to code. And it's Brennan's been doing a thing. This is kind of on the DL. We haven't officially it's on our YouTube channel, but we haven't made a big deal about it. But he's finding other people's websites and basically recreating the look in Podpage just to
Oh,
show its flexibility.
I love it.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That could be a whole segment, kind of like, when they renovate a house, you can renovate your
Yeah,
podcast. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
That's it.
Okay. All right. That's awesome. So you mentioned monetization. You've seen all the monetization models, Dave, from
Yeah.
sponsorships to memberships to courses. Which ones have stood the test of time?
That's a good one. It seems to be That's a good one. Courses definitely are any kind of memberships come in handy. the one that everybody talks about, and I kind of feel this is going to be an episode in the future. It's in the oven baking, but I think a lot of people feel that their podcast is only legit if they have sponsors. And that
Mm,
makes me a little sad because you can change the world with your podcast and not make a dime. But I always tell people that he said, shamelessly grabbing his book,
yes, sir.
if I sell a copy of this book, I make $12 if you buy it from me. Now, if I wanted to make $12 on ads, and I'll be generous and say it's $5 CPM, which is cost per thousand downloads. I'd have to get 2,400 downloads to make the same price as selling one book. And I'm like, which one's easier, getting 2,400 downloads or selling one book? If you've got the right audience, I always say the most profitable thing you can do is sell your own stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is when you're consistent, right? You're seen as reliable. When you're consistent in your content, they like you because, hey, I tried that and it worked. And then anytime you can make a point with a personal story, that they kind of get to know you. And so now there's the whole know, like, and trust. So when you say, hey, I've got a book, I've got a course, or I've got coaching or whatever it is, that's definitely easier than when people don't know you at all. I mean, I got hired back in the day. The New Media Expo was before Podfest and before Podcast Movement.
Right.
And this sounds like humble brag theater, but this happened. At the time, the guy that ran the event called Spreaker, called Blueberry, and called Libsyn and said, hey, we need a new head of podcasting over here. And this is before I worked at Libsyn. Like, who do you think would be a good fit? And all three of those people said, I don't know, what about Dave Jackson?
Yeah.
And so without, number one, I had all those people on my show. So it grows your network.
Right.
And so that when somebody goes, I need a podcast guy, they go, oh, I got somebody.
Right.
So that's one of the advantages of doing like interviews. But when you do a solo show, you grow your influence. So people always go, should I do a solo show or should I do interviews? And I go, why are you limiting yourself? Do both.
Yeah.
And then when I do a solo show, it's not, hey guys, there's none of that stuff. I talk to one person. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. And when I talk to people who listen to my show, they go, I always feel like you're talking to me. And I go, cause I am,
Yeah.
So yeah. Now, on the other hand, like I've had really at times amazing success with affiliate marketing. There was a time when Jillian Michaels was on The Biggest Loser, and then she left and she did a radio show that she turned into a podcast.
Nice.
And then she went back to The Biggest Loser. Well, she quit her radio show and her podcast. And everybody's like, what happened to the Jillian Michaels show? So I created one. It was the Jillian Michaels fan cast. And I would basically mildly and politely and respectfully stalk her and explain what she's been up to. And God bless that woman. She put her name on everything. Everything was an affiliate. And so I remember she came out with her first book that she had narrated on Audible. And I made $15 every time somebody signed up at Audible.
Nice.
And when that came out, when I got my commission check, it was 4 figures. And I was like, thank you, Jillian Michaels. And then unfortunately, she left The Biggest Loser and came back and started doing her podcast again. So would you rather listen to some weird white dude talk about Jillian Michaels, or do you want to actually listen to Jillian Michaels? So that was the end of that. But I used to do a weight loss show, and I remember there were these things called fit decks. They're little decks of cards, and I bought one because anything I want to talk about, I want to make sure
You have it.
I've either read it or tasted it or whatever. And I said, hey, these things are pretty cool, and I could see turning this into a game with like your kids. And that was the phrase that pays. That's when I found out that most of my audience were moms with children. And I'd make like $1.50 per deck, but they had like 6 or 7 different decks. It was like the military fit deck and the pregnant mom fit deck and the blah, blah, blah. And I remember I got a commission check for $300,
Nice.
$1.50 at a time, but it was the right product for the right audience. So
Yes.
affiliate marketing can really, add up if you get the right product for the right thing. And then there are donations and there's crowdfunding. I do a show on Saturday morning, and it was 2 things. I wanted to play with Blog Talk Radio back in the day. And then when Patreon came along, I was like, oh, let's see how this works, so that's another way to do that. And I've seen people, there's a website It's Graphtreon. So GRPH Treon. And there are people that have turned on their stats so you can see how much they're making a month. And there are people that are making more money in a month than I make in a year.
Yep.
And I was like, whoa, but you also see where they started, 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
And they're usually pretty niche. The one show I looked into, they do 4 shows, and 2 shows are free a month, and 2 shows you have to pay for. Because I was like, how are you getting, hundreds of thousands of people?
Right.
And so that's another one. Crowdfunding can come in handy. Then there's good old fashioned donations, but you have to ask for those.
Yep.
And some people kind of feel weird about that. But it's not what is the strategy. It's just do them all
Yeah.
and see what works. Because there are times when I remember when the economy kind of tanked a little bit, my crowdfunding went down a little bit because people were like, sorry, but things are getting tight. But my membership went up because people are like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and make money.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a weird stock portfolio. Things go up and down, they're inverted to each other. So I was really happy I had multiple streams of income because, that could have been a little like, well, I guess we're back to ramen and mac and cheese for dinner,
Right. So you mentioned the N word, niche, right?
Yeah.
So I try to help my clients understand the deeper you niche down, the easier it will be for you to monetize later because the audience will feel like, yes, this is for me. I know, like, and trust their voice, and I trust the recommendation, right? So just touch on that one more time. How important is it for podcasters to really niche down on their audience to monetize?
Yeah, I always use the example. I could start a podcast and say how to be more confident. Like who doesn't want to be more confident? Okay. But that's kind of, it's a mile wide and it's an inch deep. I could say, well, what about being a more confident parent? Okay, well, we just cut out a bunch of people who don't have kids. What if I said more confident first time parent? Okay, well, and then if you can keep kind of going down and after, so what about being a more confident um, first time interracial parent? Okay, now we've got a whole different set of things we got to talk about. And those people now, and you've cut out a bunch of people,
Yep.
but the people that are left are like, and I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about this. Now, if there's a product that fits that, or books or coaching or whatever it is, those people are like, yes, I can't believe you made this for me. I always kind of jokingly say, you want your audience to kind of go, did you read my diary? Like,
Right.
I've been really thinking about that. And you can kind of niche down too far. Like, if I said, a more confident, first time interracial parent in Wisconsin. Okay. That's in, you can kind of niche yourself out of an audience, but you can always expand back out. I had a friend of mine, Lee Silverstein, did the colon cancer podcast. So number one, beautiful name because you didn't have to ask what that show was
Yep.
about. And he did it for years and inspired a ton of people because Lee had stage 4 colon cancer and was supposed to die in a matter of months and lived like almost a decade
Wow.
when he was supposed to be dead. And he inspired a lot of people, but about 5 or 6 years into it, he said, you know what? If one person in your family has cancer, everybody has cancer
Wow.
because it just affects the whole family. So he rebranded his show to We Have Cancer. So he was still talking colon cancer, but it was a little more about let's take care of the family too. And how are we all dealing with this? So you can always expand back out. That's kind of one of the advantages. If you start really tiny, you're like, hey, I might have niched down a little too far. You can always widen it up a little bit. Besides, if he had said, hey, we're sick. Okay, now we're talking cancer. We're talking like, no, no, no. He just went up just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dave, I want to take you this direction. What's your
All
take
right.
on dynamic ad insertion and programmatic ads? Are they worth it for independent creators?
See, this is again, of course, it depends. For me, no, because if I'm doing, let's say 300 downloads and I'm getting paid 0.005, I think it's $1.50. I'm trying to do math in my head here. It's not much. And I get it. There are going to be those people who are like, well, it's better than a poke in the eye. And I'm like, yeah, but isn't kind
It's
of
important.
everything better than a poke in the eye?
Right.
So for me, I'm like, the other thing is many times they don't fit the audience.
Mm.
And people don't hate advertising. They hate bad advertising. Uh, Many moons ago, I used to listen to a show about WordPress, and I really didn't like the show, but their ads were amazing because they point out these cool web tools that I'd never heard of. So I listened. It was kind of like the Super Bowl. I
Nice.
listened for the commercials. So I just had somebody recommended a marketing show. It started off with about a minute and a half of commercials. That's not a great first impression in my book. And I'm going to go into my Pocket Cast and I'm going to say, hey, start this show at a minute 35. I'm just going to skip all those. And then what was interesting is, and on one hand, hey, cool that you can do this, but it sent me a ad in Spanish. Now, nothing wrong with that, except, well, I don't speak Spanish. So it's hola, da, 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 and I'm like, okay, whatever. And then later in the show, it played me the same Spanish podcast or same ad. And I'm like, okay, number one, you got the same ad twice.
Right.
That's kind of annoying. And number two, you're targeting the wrong guy here. I'm
Right.
not in California. I'm not in Texas. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And so I watched I watch Friends on Nickelodeon sometimes at night because there's nothing else on or whatever. And they did 16 ads in their first break. 16 ads. They're all 30-second, 15-second. But I really started to feel like, are they ever coming back?
Yeah.
Now it was 5 minutes. That's a lot of ads. And I see people go, well, Joe Rogan does 7 minutes. I'm like, that's true. And you're not Joe Rogan,
Right.
and I'm like, Joe Rogan did that after he built the audience. You're trying to build your audience. You got 12 people and you're subjecting them to 7 minutes of unrelated ads. I'm like, I think I know why your show's not growing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing. A it's an income stream. It's my least favorite because most of the time the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing on that note. So, beyond sponsorships, how can podcasters monetize their influence and not
Oh,
just the episodes?
that's one that is kind of I don't know that I've actively done that. And as you say that, I go, I probably should. I should hire somebody to go get me speaking gigs. I should
Yeah.
hire somebody to things like that. I'm really not pursuing it. I just get asked. On occasion I will see somebody will say, "Oh, are you going to this event?" And I've never heard of it. Like I'm going to one in Chicago in July, and it's a podcast event for higher education.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I went over, I was like, I never heard of this. And I saw where they were, looking for speakers. And I was like, hey, I'm Dave Jackson. I'd love to come speak. And luckily they picked me.
Wow.
But I've had like my book offer. I didn't pursue that at all. I just happened to be rewriting. I'd originally written a book called More Podcast Money. And like every book about technology, it was pretty old in the tooth. And I was like, we need to rewrite this. And it just so happened that this publisher came up to me and said, hey, would you be interested in writing a book about monetization? And I was like, as a matter of fact, I'm doing that right now. And so that came about. I've had speaking gigs that just people have either seen me speak or knew somebody who saw me speak. So those kind of come in naturally. And it's one of those where it's like, well, how many more would I have if I
Right.
actually went out and tried to do that? So, but even I got a job once. I used to teach at Chancellor University in Cleveland, Ohio. And I think the reason I got the gig is during the interview, they said, what do you do for your hobbies? And I said, well, I play the guitar, I ride my bike, and I podcast. And this was, again, the early days. And they're like, wait, you podcast? And I
Yeah.
go, oh, yeah, I actually teach people how. And I said, I could see where we could start a podcast for the school
Right.
and do a podcast about how to study and how to be a better student. And I'm pretty sure that's what got me the gig. I already mentioned the New Media Expo. And when I lost my job in teaching because I think at that point everybody and their brother had learned Microsoft Office and they didn't need me anymore. And I was like, well, I'd really love to get a job in podcasting. Well, I knew Rob Walsh at Libsyn. And so I called him up and I said, hey, buddy, I go, you want to play a game? I've got bad news and good news. And he's like, okay, I'll play. He goes, what's the bad news? I go, I just lost my job. And he goes, and what's the good news? And I go, I'm available to work for you. I
Nice.
said, I told you this might get awkward. And he goes, no, no. He goes, I'd say I'm sorry to hear you lost your job, but I'm not. He goes, what are you doing the rest of the day? And I go, I literally just lost my job, probably laundry, And 20 minutes later, I'm on the phone with the president of Libsyn. So
Wow.
it's those, I would say a podcast leads to relationships and the
Yeah.
relationships lead to opportunities. And some of those are just an opportunity to grow your audience. And sometimes, I've been paid to speak sometimes handsomely. And I was like, okay, that doesn't suck,
Yeah.
so because I'll go and talk for free. I shouldn't say that out loud, but I mean, to me, I miss the days. That's the one thing I miss from being a teacher is when I can see my words have effect on the faces in front of me.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun. But yeah, so your reputation. In fact, the co-host of my Saturday show, Jim Collison, does a show called Home Gadget Geeks, and his daughter was in journalism, so she started a podcast. And when she went to go get a job, her podcast was kind of a resume,
Yeah.
and it made her stand out. So there are a lot of ways that by having that podcast, it is kind of your resume, it's your networking tool, and because there are a lot of people that if I said, "Hey, can we get on a Zoom call and let me pick your brain for 20 minutes?" They'd be like, "Get out of here, kid, you bother me."
Right.
But if I say, "Will you come on my podcast and let me pick your brain?" They're like, "Oh yeah, where do I sign up?"
Right.
So that's where it builds your network.
Yeah. You can definitely leverage your influence with a podcast. So, when it comes to podcasting, putting out content, feeling stuck, how do you encourage your podcasting students? Because you are operating as a podcast dean. You have podcasters in different phases, about to get started, have already started. Some are sustaining and succeeding. How do you navigate teaching people at different levels of podcasting?
Yeah, it's the one course I have. I have different pictures, and it shows like here's like a classroom. It's like 20 people. So when I see people go, well, I've only got 60 downloads. I'm like, that's a hallway where I used to teach. That's
Yeah.
3 classrooms that they're not watching Netflix, they're not listening to satellite radio, they're not playing video games, they're not watching a movie. Like, there's no spam in podcasting. So there's that person. And I always tell people, and I'm so glad I did this, when you get that email that says, wow, that was a really great show. I can't believe that was so helpful. But like, save that, because there are going to be those days when you wake up and you're like, all right, time to do the podcast. And you're like, why am I even doing this? Right. You're going to get that little voice in your head. And then you go into that folder and you're like, oh, it's for Kim Craggy. It's for Ken Blanchard. It's for, and you can kind of go in and do that. Cause again, going back to, you got to know your why.
Yeah.
And so, but I do have pictures of like, here's a classroom, here's a small theater, here's a bigger theater, here's, an auditorium, here's 1,000 people, and again, these are people who have chosen to do that. And then it's just a matter of, how the fun part is when, okay, it's off the ground and it's growing, but it's growing slowly.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, realize podcasting itself, the industry grows at about 3 to 7% a year.
Yep.
I go, so when you're trying to do 50% in a year, it's we kind of use the same um strategy as the movies. If you think about it, a movie spends a ton of money up front. They put the movie out and hope that they can get a bunch of people to go see it. And then the goal is those people are going to come out of the theater and tell their friends. So
Right.
if you look at it's an older movie, but it's a great one if you haven't seen it, called The Sixth Sense.
Hmm.
And everybody that sees that movie watches it at least twice, because there's a fun little thing at the end that you're like, wait, what? But everybody came out of that movie and told them. Now, what was fun is that movie was almost an independent movie. It
Mm.
was low budget. And then you compare it to something like The Lone Ranger. And again, this is a movie from the 90s, but it had Johnny Depp at the like top of his Johnny Deppness. He was doing all the pirate movies. And I saw that movie. It was horrible. It was just, and so when I came out of the movie, I was calling my friends, but I was like, yeah, I know you got the Happy Meal and the poster already, but this movie is awful.
Right.
So we kind of go by that way of growing. And I always say when people go, well, I don't know what my call to action should be. I go, when you don't know what the call to action should be, it should be, hey, if you know somebody else, today we're talking about podcasting. Do you know somebody else who's thinking of starting a podcast? Could you do us a favor? Could you go to your phone and just click that share button? I go, that is always a great call to action, because depending on the reports you look at, somewhere between 60 and 70% of podcasts are discovered via word of mouth.
Yeah.
So throw some gas on that word of mouth. And as much as we kind of go, well, yeah, I mean, the share button's always there. And I'm like, yeah, but how many YouTube videos do you watch that they go like, subscribe, and smash the bell? Well, we all know what that button does in the bottom right-hand corner. So why are they telling us? Because it reminds us. So
Yeah.
when in doubt, ask your audience to share.
Awesome advice. Dave, tell us about your book and where we can find it.
Yeah, profit from your podcast, the proven strategies to turn listeners into a livelihood. And I interviewed probably 70 different podcasters to put that together. You can find that at profitfromyourpodcast.com. Now available as an audiobook. I got a lot of flack for that,
Let's
that it
go.
came out and I ended up, and it's so funny because it's your words and I'm reading the book and I'm trying to make it sound like I'm not reading the book. And I kind of did I took a page out of Gary V because it had been, I want to say 3 years since I'd written the book by the time I did the audiobook. And I just said, look, we're going to sit down at the kitchen table here and I'm going to kind of go through this book. But there are times if I see something that is outdated because it is a book about technology, I'm just going to fly off the script, and I hope that's cool with you. And so there are some things in there that aren't in the book. So if you're more of a listener than a reader, that is available over there at profitfromyourpodcast.com.
Awesome. Now I have the red copy here in my office, but I'm gonna also get the audio version as well to experience that because I believe it's so valuable and helpful and inspiring for all podcasters. Now you mentioned the School of Podcasting in passing. How can we be involved with the School of Podcasting? Where do we enroll, and what is the process like to be a student in that podcasting university?
Yeah, when you can go to schoolofpodcasting.com/join, and that'll take you over. I use a tool called Heartbeat that I found years ago, and it is a community building tool. So it's kind of like Facebook, except Facebook can't, or Heartbeat won't shut me down for no apparent reason. I had a guy on a couple weeks ago, had I think he said 89,000 people in a Facebook group, and Facebook just went, nah, I don't think so,
Wow.
and just deleted the whole thing. And they're like, he's like, can I appeal that? And they're like, nope. And I was like, wow, that's why I don't. I have a Facebook group, but it's only there because I have people who will not leave Facebook. And I'm like, okay. So you've got as soon as you sign up, you come right into the community, you introduce yourself, and we're all like, hey, so glad you're here. But you've got the courses there, and then just a bunch of I mean, we've got everything from marriage counselors to retired pastors to accountants to comic writers. It's a whole slew of people, and we're all focused on the same thing. How can we all make the best content to positively both affect us and our audience? And like right now, my buddy Ralph Estep is getting ready to launch a book. And about every day you walk in, and he's got another two covers for us to vote on. Which one do you like, red or blue? That kind of stuff. So you've got the courses, you've got the community, and then I still do. If you want to hire me as a consultant, you can, but it dawned on me that was quote my big ticket item. And I would knock on doors and I'd be like, hey, I see you're doing this. Do you need help with your podcast? And eventually I would get someone to hire me. They'd buy an hour of my time. I would answer all their questions and I would never see them again. Well, I
Wow.
started doing this with everything I do. I use a tool called Clockify. And when I'd be like, all right, I'm going to go knock on some doors, I'd start Clockify and then, I'd stop it. And then it turned out that my quote big ticket item, when I actually saw how much time I took, because I'd answer a couple questions for free, I'm trying to get them to really, and in the end, I'm like, wait, this is not a big ticket item. And I'm like, it's a bummer because I love to coach people.
Yeah.
It's my background. So I said, wait a minute, let's raise the price of the School of Podcasting a little bit. And let's just give unlimited coaching
Nice.
to people inside. And one of the reasons I did that is I looked at my competition and they were all married with kids. And I went, what do they not have that I do? And I go, time. I have
Yes.
no, and I was like, and I love to coach. And so I started doing that, and it's fun. I found an app that we can definitely set up a Zoom meeting. I had one over the weekend, and it was funny because we had to cancel it because I didn't have any power. But it's pretty much, here's my schedule. Here's when I'm available. If you see that it's Wednesday and you want to do Wednesday, like pick it. But I also have right now a client in Thailand, and she's like, I don't really feel like getting up at 4 a.m. to do a Zoom call. And so I have an app that you can send me audio, video, screen share if you want to, or just a text message.
Nice.
And so I have a lot of people every day that there's like, hey, I got a quick question. And so we'll do coaching on the app depending on what they want to do. Some people love Zoom, and I'm like, short of smoke signals, whatever you need, I will do.
Yeah.
And so, and what I found is I still do the occasional coaching call, but because I'm now getting a stronger relationship with the students, they're staying longer.
Yeah.
So in the end, I'm actually making more money than I was when I was doing these big coaching calls.
Yeah.
And again, the relationship. So it is a case when somebody goes, hey, like, how'd you learn how to podcast? They're like, oh, you go to talk to my buddy Dave. So that's something I just started doing about a year and a half ago.
That is awesome. I always say that one of the greatest things about podcasting is the relationships that you make. And it's a wonderful way to connect with people. And I am so inspired by your journey, David. And thank you so much for sharing your story, your expertise, and for just pouring out all the gems on this particular episode. So, from your perspective, the next 10, 20, 30 years, where do you see podcasting going?
Oh, it's going to be fun because the people with big budgets, in my opinion, are trying to ruin podcasting.
Ooh,
They're trying to take it and turn it into radio, where they just cram because the price of advertising is actually coming down. And I go, this is where being old kind of helps. I remember the days when not everybody had a website, and if you did, you could make some bank with banner ads.
mm,
And there were people like, man, this internet thing is great. And then making a website got easier and easier and easier. And all of a sudden, where it used to be, you had to pay people top dollar because you were one of the few people with a website. Now they could go, we want to pay you lower. And people go, well, I'm not taking that. You used to pay me this. And they'd go to somebody else who just started their website and go, we're going to pay you this. And they're like, we'll take it. So it's a race to the bottom
mm,
as now more and more tools are available to where you can put ads in it. And I know people that are making a living just from ads, and they've all either added another episode where it used to be Monday through Friday. Now they do the special Saturday show. Why? Because I'm not getting paid as much,
yeah,
and I got to have something to put ads in. Or they just straight up add more ads to their show, which is starting to ruin the experience.
yeah,
And I always tell people radio is 30% ads. If you download the Dave Ramsey show, you will see where his first hour is 32 minutes because the rest is advertising. And
yeah,
I'm like, we don't, I mean, one of the reasons why podcasting took off is because it wasn't radio. We all weren't talking like this. Hey, everybody, and it wasn't chock full of ads. And I go, let's not turn it into radio.
yeah,
And so there are going to be people, because I mean, here's the worst case scenario. If we end up with Spotify and YouTube as the only two options,
we're
and then
doomed.
you say booger and you get kicked off of YouTube and there's no place to go, you're going to wish you hadn't, kind of, oh, who needs RSS feed? We do. We
Yeah,
need RSS feeds.
yeah,
That's the openness, and that keeps us in power. Because I remember as a musician that we had recorded like a demo CD and we wanted to put it in stores. And they're like, who are you? Like, are you on a record label? Like, no. So that was, you couldn't get places. And so podcasting is like, hey, you can be global,
yeah,
because you've got that feed. So I think it's going to be interesting. I keep telling, anytime I see stuff, I'm like, hey, here's some news. These are the people you want to get in bed with. These are the people you want to trust.
right.
So I try to but greed is a big motivator.
Yeah,
And when the big companies come up and go, hey there, kid, we can make you look at all the money here, sir. And you're like, and they just fall into it. I remember once I got into an argument with a guy from Podcast One at the new media show. And like it was like junior high, like people actually surrounded us in a circle to watch it go down. And because I was like, why don't you just charge more for your ad? Because you've got this great relationship. We've already proven that podcast ads work. Why not just charge more and have less? And he at the end, he kind of put his arm around me. He goes, we need to talk. And I just felt like, this is one of those where if it was a movie, there'd be like a tail and a pitchfork coming out
right.
of his yeah, I was like, this guy's gonna try to, but yeah. So I always tell people just if you're a fan of HBO and whatever it was, Game of Thrones, were the ones like, hold the door. And I'm like, hold your price.
Right.
Don't take the lower price. Like, we're going to ruin it if we keep just taking peanuts. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's where
Yeah.
we're going. I hope that's not where we go. I think it'll always be great and it'll grow. But for the bigger shows, there's going to be a lot of that going on.
Yeah. It seems like right now a lot of folks are going heavy onto the video side of podcasting, and they're saying, well, if you don't have a video component, it's not a real podcast. The reality is video builds engagement, but audio builds intimacy. And do you believe that even with AI and artificial voices, that audio podcasting will be here forever? Or do you think it may evolve?
Yeah, in the same way that they thought the VCR was going to kill the movie industry, it didn't. And I think what's going to come through and it's going to stick out like a sore thumb is authentic voices.
Yeah.
Like I was on YouTube and I forget what I was looking for and I hit play and the voice came on and it was so obviously AI and I was like, okay, next. And then I went to the next one and it was another AI generate and it's just pictures from Amazon that they're zooming in on. And I was like, you know what? On one hand, it's annoying because I'm trying to get some helpful information and none of this is helpful. But when you finally see somebody that's holding the product going, hey, I tried this today,
Yes.
you're like, oh, there we go. There's a person. So as much as I hate all the, the AI stuff, I was on a call this week. It was kind of a mastermind thing. And in a nutshell, people were kind of saying, I want AI to do everything.
Mm,
Like I wanted to generate the topics and then I wanted to write the script and then I want the AI voice to do it. I'm like, look, if you don't want to do a podcast, don't do a podcast.
right.
You know what I mean? It's like, I want to do a podcast, but I don't want to do any of the work. And of course, they want to make, millions of dollars. And I
Right.
was just like, so when I hear those people, and they're going to do that, they're going to make the, automated, and there are already thousands of people
Yep.
doing this AI stuff. And I'm like, well, go ahead, because you're just going to make me sound that much better. I don't really view those people as competition. So, yeah, but no, I don't think audio is going to go away. It's, the when I did a talk at Podcast Movement Evolutions on the YouTube stage, which was somewhat awkward, but I did some research. And if you look at audience size per active creator, audio outperforms YouTube, even though there's billions of people over there. But in terms of audience size, 15-1.
Yep.
And I can't watch your video while I'm in the car or washing dishes or walking the dog. So I always tell people, keep in mind when they say everybody says I need to be on video, I go, there's a name for that, everyone, and it's YouTube. And
Yep.
of course YouTube wants you to do video. So I'm not anti-video. It saddens me when somebody comes up and says, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing a podcast. Could you help?" And I'll be like, "Sure." And they'll tell me the idea, and I'm like, "That is brilliant. I can't wait." And they're like, "Why? How long you've been sitting on this idea?" And they're like, "Oh, about 2 years." And I'm like, "Well, what stopped you?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't want to do video." And I'm like, "Well, you don't have to do video." And they go, "I don't have to do video." And I go, "No, not every book needs to be a movie. You don't have
Right.
to do video." And they're like, "Oh, because everybody said I had to do video." And I go, "Well, everybody is YouTube." And I go, "And if you have the desire and the budget and the time, oh, by all means, do YouTube. You'd be stupid not to. But if you don't have the time or the budget or the desire, just do audio. There are
Yeah.
plenty of podcasts that are just crushing it and they're audio only."
Yeah. Yeah. Man, Dave, thank you so much for sharing on the Leverage Your Influence podcast. For those who have benefited from all of this pod knowledge and all the pod gems, be sure to share this podcast with a friend. Dave, please let them know where to connect with you beyond this moment.
Yeah, you can find me over at schoolofpodcasting.com. And if that's not enough, I do have a site that has like everything I do. That's a little overwhelming, but you can find that at powerofpodcasting.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. Before you go, give one last word of inspiration. If you could speak to 1 million podcasters right now on a stage, what would you say?
Yes, people will listen to you. I know you think you're weird. I know you think you're different because nobody in your little circle is like you. But guess what? There are a lot of people just like you that are thinking they're outside and on the outside looking in, and they just don't know you exist. You don't know they exist. But if you actually put yourself out there, somebody's going to go, "Wow, that person's just like me," and then there'll be more of them. I just listened to a show where Howie Mandel has OCD. So he's kind of, now we just call him a germaphobe, but he had OCD, and he accidentally announced this on the Howard Stern show, and it went out to everyone.
Yeah.
He thought they were off the air. And he said when he went outside, he was like, my career is over. My children are going to get teased in school. I'm such a freak. I'm so weird. And somebody said, hey, are you Howie Mandel? And he said, yeah. And he said, the guy said two words that changed his life. And he just said, me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, get out there, put yourself out there. It's a joke, but it's not a joke, because two things are going to happen. Either you'll start a great podcast, or you'll have a great story about the time when you try to start a podcast. And either one is beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. You never lose, you only learn.
That's it. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, for being a guest on Leverage Your Influence podcast. And we pray that you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week. Take care. Till next time.